There's a half second in this job between hearing something and being allowed to act on it. Usually that half second is nothing. You wait for the word. You wait for approval. That's the whole machine, and the machine works. But there was one afternoon when I didn't wait. When her name came through the radio in a voice I'd never heard that voice used before, and my body was already moving before my training could catch up and tell me to stand still. I broke protocol. I moved without approval, and I have never, for one single second since, regretted it. Let me tell you about that afternoon, because it's the proudest and most frightening few minutes of my whole life, and I think about them more than I think about almost anything else. My name is Joss. I served for 6 years on royal protection, not the ceremonial side, not the red tunics and the bearskins you see in the photographs, but the working side, the quiet side, the earpiece and plain suit side, the part of the operation that most people never notice precisely because we're good at not being noticed. Our whole job is to be invisible right up until the instant we can't be, and then to be the fastest, most decisive thing in the room. This particular afternoon, I was part of the protection detail for an engagement involving the Princess of Wales. I won't be too specific about exactly where or exactly when, for reasons you'll understand, and for reasons of the job that I'll carry to my grave. I'll just say it was a public engagement. One of those events where she'd come to visit a place that mattered, to meet people, to do the quiet good work that she did so well, the work the cameras never quite capture the real warmth of. It was a children's facility. That's as much as I'll say. A place full of children, on an ordinary afternoon, and the princess had come to spend time with them, and the whole place was lit up with the particular electricity that fills a building when someone people love walks into it. It was autumn, and I know, but autumns really are when these things seem to happen, maybe because that's when the light goes strange and the year tips over toward dark. There was a low gray sky and a cold wind that kept snatching at the bunting they'd put up. The kind of afternoon where the warmth is all indoors, and the outdoors just wants you to hurry through it. I want to tell you about her briefly, the way I saw her that day. Not the public version. The real one, the one you only see when you're standing close in plain clothes and you're not supposed to be looked at. She was good with the children in a way you can't fake. I've watched a lot of important people do a lot of public engagements, and most of them are performing warmth, doing a very good, very practiced impression of caring, while their eyes flick to the clock and the cameras. She wasn't doing that. When she crouched down to a child's level, and she always crouched down, always got herself down to their height so they weren't looking up at someone towering and frightening, she was there. Completely. She'd ask a child about the drawing in their hands and then actually listen to the answer, the whole rambling 4-year-old answer, nodding along like it was the most important briefing she'd had all week. There was one little boy, I remember, who was too shy to come near her, hanging back at the edge of the room, half hidden behind a teacher, watching everyone else get their moment with her and not daring to take his own. And she noticed him. In the middle of all that noise and attention, she noticed the one child who was hanging back. And she didn't push, she didn't march over and overwhelm him. She just drifted that way, slowly, found something to look at near where he was standing, made herself smaller and less frightening, and waited and let him come to her in his own time. And eventually he did. And the look on his face when she finally gave him her full attention, I've kept that one. That's one of the good ones I've kept. I tell you all this so you understand what kind of person we were protecting that day. Not a symbol, not a title. A genuinely kind woman doing genuinely kind things, surrounded by children who adored her. That matters for what comes next. It matters a great deal. The engagement was going perfectly. That's the thing about these afternoons. They're meant to be uneventful, and the highest compliment you can pay one is that nothing happened. A protection officer's dream day is a day where they were never needed, where they stood at the edges and watched, and the worst thing that occurred was a spilled juice box. We were maybe 2/3 of the way through. The princess had moved into a larger room, a hall really, where a lot of the children and families had gathered, where there was going to be some kind of small presentation, drawings displayed on the walls, that sort of thing. It was crowded and warm and loud with the happy chaos of a room full of excited kids. I was at my position near one of the side doors, scanning the way you scan, not looking at anything, looking at everything, the soft wide gaze that's trained to catch the one thing in 100 that's wrong. And then her name came through the radio. I have to explain something about how the radio works, so you understand why what happened next hit me the way it did. On a detail like that, the radio is a constant low murmur in your ear. Position checks, movement calls, the dry professional chatter of a team keeping track of itself. Team 2 moving to the east corridor. Copy. Principal in the main hall, copy. It's calm. It's procedural. The whole tone of it is deliberately flat because flatness is control and control is safety. You learn to half listen to it the way you half listen to your own heartbeat. Always there, rarely demanding your attention until the one moment it does. And the way you know the one moment has come is not the words, it's the voice. It's the sound of a trained, calm professional's voice losing its flatness. That's the thing that goes through you like ice water, faster than any words could. Because these are people trained to stay flat through almost anything. So when the flatness breaks, when you hear the edge come into a colleague's voice, your body understands before your mind does that something is very wrong. That's what happened. The murmur in my ear, the calm procedural murmur, broke. And a voice I knew, one of the team, posted closer to the princess than I was, came through, and the flatness was gone, and in its place was something tight and urgent and almost disbelieving, and the voice said her name, said the call sign we used for the princess, and then said 3 words after it that turned my blood to ice. I'm not going to tell you the exact call sign or the exact 3 words because some of that is the job and stays the job, but I'll tell you what they meant. They meant, something is happening to her right now, and it is not on the schedule and it is not under control. And here is the thing. Here is the exact thing this whole story is about. In that instant, the protocol, the machine, the training, the entire careful apparatus I'd spent 6 years learning said one thing. Wait, hold position. Do not move until you have a clear instruction. Movement without coordination is how protection details collide, how officers end up in each other's way, how a controlled situation becomes a chaotic one. You do not freelance. You wait for the word. That's correct, by the way. I want to be clear about that. The protocol is correct. 99 times out of 100, the officer who moves without approval is the officer who makes everything worse. The discipline of waiting for the word exists for excellent reasons, written in the hard lessons of people who learned them the worst way. I believed in that discipline. I still believe in it. But there was a voice in my ear that had lost its flatness, saying her name, saying those 3 words. And there was a room full of children between me and her. And there was a half second, that half second between hearing and being allowed to act, and in that half second, something in me that was deeper than 6 years of training, something older and faster and completely beyond my control, simply decided. My feet were already moving before the half second was over. I moved without approval. I broke the protocol I believed in. I started pushing fast but controlled, the way you learn to move through a crowd without causing a panic, toward the place in that crowded, noisy, child-filled hall where the voice had said the princess was, toward the trouble, without the word, without the approval, with nothing but the sound of a colleague's broken voice and an instinct I couldn't have stopped if I'd wanted to. I didn't know yet what was happening. I didn't know what I was running toward. I just knew her name had come through the radio in a voice that had never sounded like that before, and that there were children all around her, and that whatever it was, I was going to get to her, and the asking permission could happen afterward. What I found when I got there, and the few seconds that followed, the seconds that everything had been training me for without my ever knowing it, is the next part of the story. But I'll tell you this now so you know it's coming. It was not what I expected. It was both less and more than I feared. And it taught me something about that woman, in the middle of her own emergency, that I have never been able to forget. Moving fast through a crowd without causing a panic is a skill. It's one of the first things they teach you, and it's harder than it sounds. The instinct when you need to get somewhere urgently is to shove, to shout, to clear a path by force. But in a room full of people, especially a room full of children and parents, panic is its own emergency. A crowd that senses a protection officer suddenly running will turn into a stampede in seconds, and then you've created a second disaster on top of whatever the first one was. So you learn to move fast and calm at the same time. Urgent feet, easy face. You slide through gaps rather than forcing them. You keep your expression neutral, almost pleasant, even as your heart is hammering, because the people you pass take their cue from your face, and if your face says nothing is wrong, they stay calm, and a calm crowd is a crowd you can move through. That's how I crossed that hall, fast as I could go without breaking the surface calm of the room, threading between families, around tables of children's drawings, past a cluster of teachers, my eyes locked on the far corner where the voice had said she was. The whole crossing took maybe 8 seconds. It felt like an hour. And as I got closer, I started to see it, the thing that was happening, and it wasn't what I'd feared in that first cold instant. When you hear a colleague's voice break and say the principal's name, your mind goes to the worst place. It's trained too. In the 8 seconds it took me to cross that hall, my mind had run through every nightmare in the catalog, an attacker, a weapon, a medical collapse, all the things we drill for and pray never to see. I was braced as I moved for any of them. What I actually found was a child. Not a threat, a child. A small girl, maybe 6 years old, and she was in serious trouble, but the medical kind, the sudden terrifying kind. She'd been fine one moment, part of the happy crowd, and then she was on the floor, and her face had gone a color a child's face should never be, and she was clutching at her own throat and she could not breathe. She was choking. Something, a sweet, a piece of food, one of the small hazards that live in every room full of excited children, had gone down wrong, and was now blocking her airway completely, and the little girl was in those first awful silent seconds of a true choke, where there's no coughing and no sound because there's no air at all to make sound with. Just wide, terrified eyes and small hands at a small throat and the most frightening silence in the world. And kneeling on the floor beside her, already there, already moving, was the princess. I stopped for just an instant at the edge of it, because what I was seeing made no sense against everything I knew about how these moments are supposed to go. The protocol in a situation like that is clear. If something happens near the principal, any incident, even a medical one involving someone else, the principal is supposed to be moved, extracted, got away from the unpredictable situation and to safety immediately while others deal with whatever it is. That's the rule, and it's a good rule, because in the chaos of an emergency you cannot rule out that the incident is a cover for something aimed at the principal, and your one job, your only job, is the principal's safety. You get them out. That's what the team would have been trying to do. That's almost certainly what the broken voice in the radio had been about. Not that the princess was in danger, but that the princess was refusing to be moved. Because she was. She'd seen the child go down, and instead of allowing herself to be swept to safety the way every protocol demanded, she had done the exact opposite. She'd gone to the child. She was down on the floor, on her knees in the middle of a public hall, with her own protection team presumably trying to get her to leave, and she was not leaving. She had a hand on the little girl, and she was looking at her with absolute focus, and she was doing something. She was helping. She was, I realized, in the half-second I stood frozen at the edge of it, trying to help that child herself. Here's where my own training finally became useful, where the instinct that had moved me without approval turned out to have moved me to exactly the right place. Because I have first aid training. We all do, on protection, extensive, drilled, refreshed constantly. We're trained for medical emergencies precisely because we're often the closest capable person when one happens. And the thing about a choking child is that seconds matter. A completely blocked airway is a clock running down toward brain damage and death, and the clock is measured in a small number of minutes. There was no time to wait for an ambulance. There was no time to wait for anyone. Whatever was going to save that little girl's life had to happen in that room, in the next 60 seconds, with the hands that were already there. And I had two trained hands, and I just put myself within reach of the child by breaking the protocol that would have kept me at my post. I dropped to my knees beside them. I caught the princess's eye for half a second, and I'll come back to that look because it matters, and I said the only thing there was time to say, which was, "I'm trained. Let me." And she, God bless her, in the middle of her own fear, with her own instinct screaming at her to keep helping the child herself, she understood instantly, and she yielded the space to me, because she was clear-headed enough even then to know that the trained hands should be the ones doing it. I got the little girl up and into position. I won't walk you through the technique blow by blow, partly because it's distressing, and partly because I'd never want someone to learn it from a story instead of from a proper course. But I'll tell you that I did the thing you do for a choking child, the firm, sharp thing that's meant to force the air up and the blockage out. And I did it the way I'd drilled 100 times on dummies, and never once, until that moment, on a real terrified child whose life was actually running out under my hands. The first attempt didn't work. I felt the whole room hold its breath. The little girl's eyes were so wide. Her mother, I could hear her now, somewhere just behind me, making a sound I never want to hear again, the sound a parent makes when they're watching their child die and can't do anything about it. I did it again, firmer, trusting the training, trusting the technique, refusing to let the fear make my hands hesitate. And the thing came free. I will remember the sound of that child's first breath for the rest of my life. It was a horrible, wonderful, ragged, whooping gasp, the sound of an airway opening, of air rushing back into lungs that had been screaming for it, and it was followed immediately by crying, loud, healthy, outraged crying. And I have never in my life been so glad to hear a child cry, because a crying child is a breathing child, a child with enough air to be furious about what had just happened to her. She was breathing. She was crying. She was alive. The color came back into her face in a rush, and her small body, which had gone rigid and silent, was suddenly thrashing and sobbing and gloriously, furiously alive. Her mother fell on her, just collapsed onto her child, gathering her up, sobbing, saying her name over and over. And the whole hall, which had gone silent without my even noticing, the happy chaos had frozen into held breath the moment people realized what was happening. The whole hall sort of exhaled at once, this collective sound of relief and disbelief, and a few people started to cry, and someone started to clap and then stopped, because it wasn't quite a clapping moment, it was too raw and too frightening still. I sat back on my heels, and my own hands were shaking now that it was over, the way they always do after, when the training lets go and the human floods back in. And I looked up. And the princess was looking at me. I told you I'd come back to that look. Here it is. In the worst of it, in the seconds when the child was choking and I'd said I'm trained, let me and taken over, the princess had not gone to safety. She still hadn't. She was still right there, on her knees on the floor beside us, where no protocol on earth said she was supposed to be. She'd refused the entire time to be extracted. She'd stayed in the danger and the chaos, with her own team surely going out of their minds trying to get her to leave, because there was a child who needed help and she was not. She was simply not going to be hurried to safety while that was true. And now that the child was breathing, the princess looked at me, and her own eyes were wet, and her own hands were not entirely steady either, and she said quietly, just to me in the middle of all that noise, she said, "Thank you. Oh, thank you. Well done. Well done." And then, before I could even respond, she turned away from me entirely, turned to the mother and the crying child, because of course she did, because that was where the need still was. She put her arms around that sobbing mother, a stranger, on the floor of a public hall, and she held her while she cried and murmured to her and stayed with her, this woman who was supposed to have been whisked away to safety 10 minutes ago and had simply refused. I knelt there and watched her do it, my hands still shaking, and I thought, I broke protocol to get to you, and you broke protocol to get to that child. We both moved without approval. We both did the thing the rules said not to do because something deeper than the rules told us to. And in that moment I understood her completely, and I think she understood me, and there was a strange quiet kinship in it, soldier and princess, two people who'd both refused to wait for the word when a life was on the line. But the story isn't over, because there was a reckoning coming for what I'd done, for the broken protocol, the unapproved movement, the abandoned post. And what happened in that reckoning and what the princess did about it is the last part of the story. There's a thing that happens after an incident in this job that the public never sees. The adrenaline drains, the immediate crisis passes, the ambulance comes and the child is checked over and pronounced, thank God, completely fine. And then, once everyone is safe and the danger is gone, the machine turns its attention to a different question. What did everybody do? Because protection is a discipline, and discipline means accountability. And accountability means that after every incident, planned or not, there is a review. A hard, unsentimental look at exactly what happened and exactly who did what and exactly whether the rules were followed. And I knew, even as I knelt there with my hands shaking and the child crying healthily in her mother's arms, that I had a review coming, and that in that review I was going to have to explain why I had abandoned my post and moved across a crowded hall toward the principal without approval, without coordination, without the word. Because that's what I'd done, stripped of all the emotion, that's the bare fact of it. I'd heard her name in the radio and I'd broken from my position and moved without authorization, and it didn't matter that it had turned out well. In protection, it turned out well is not a defense. The whole point of the discipline is that you cannot rely on things turning out well. You rely on the protocol every time, because the protocol is what protects you on the day things don't turn out well. An officer who freelances and gets lucky is still an officer who freelanced. And freelancing, in my world, can end a career. I knew all that, and I'll be honest, kneeling there in the aftermath, the fear of it was already creeping in around the edges of my relief. I'd done a thing I believed was right, and I might lose the job I loved for it. Both of those could be true at once. They often are. The review came a few days later. I won't dramatize it. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was a quiet room and serious people and a lot of careful questions. They went through it minute by minute. Where I'd been, what I'd heard, the exact moment I'd left my post, the exact path I'd taken across the hall, why I had not waited for instruction. And I told the truth, because the truth was all I had. I told them that I'd heard a colleague's voice lose its flatness and say the principal's name, and that something deeper than my training had moved me before my training could stop it. I told them I knew the protocol and believed in the protocol and had broken it anyway, and that I understood the seriousness of that. I didn't make excuses. I didn't hide behind it turned out well. I just laid it out as honestly as I could and waited for whatever was coming. And I want to be fair to the serious people in that room, because it would be easy to paint them as cold rule followers, and they weren't. They weren't trying to punish me for saving a child. They were trying to answer a genuinely hard question, the question that sits at the very center of my whole profession, and it's this. If you let officers move on instinct when they feel it's right, do you get more children saved? Or do you get chaos, collisions, and ultimately a principal who is less safe? That's not a stupid question. It's the most important question there is in that job. And reasonable, decent people can come down hard on the follow the protocol every time side of it, for reasons that have nothing to do with not caring about choking children. So I didn't know which way it would go. I genuinely didn't. And then something happened that I hadn't expected. and that I only found out about afterward. The princess intervened. I don't know exactly what she said or to whom, because it happened above my level and out of my sight. But I know that she made her view known clearly and at a level high enough that it mattered. And I know the substance of it, because some of it filtered back down to me in the way things do. She had told them, in effect, that officer's instinct put trained hands on a dying child 4 or 5 seconds faster than the protocol would have. And in a choke, 4 or 5 seconds is the whole game. If he had waited for the word, if he had done the correct thing, the protocol thing, those seconds would have been lost, and we do not know that the child would have survived them. I was there. I saw it. I will not have the man who saved that child's life treated as though he did something wrong. And then she'd said something else, the part that got back to me most clearly, the part I've kept. She'd said, "And if you want to discipline someone for moving toward a child without approval, then you'll have to discipline me first. Because I did exactly the same thing, and I'd do it again, and so would he, and so would any of us worth the uniform." That changed everything, of course. When the principal you're protecting stands up and says, "I refuse to have this man treated as if he did wrong, and if you're punishing instinct, then start with me," well, the review found what it was always probably going to find once the dust settled and the cooler heads prevailed, which was something nuanced and fair. They didn't pretend I'd followed protocol, because I hadn't, and pretending otherwise would have corroded the very discipline that keeps everyone safe. But they recognized, formally, on the record, that my action had directly saved a life, that my movement had been controlled and professional even though it was unauthorized, and that the instinct that drove it was exactly the instinct you actually want in a protection officer, even if it has to live in tension with the discipline of the role. It was written up not as a black mark, but as something closer to a commendation with an asterisk. Did the right thing the wrong way in a situation where the right thing mattered more. I kept the job, more than kept it, but I never forgot the asterisk either, and I think that's correct. The tension between the instinct and the discipline isn't something you resolve, it's something you carry. You're supposed to carry it. I met the little girl once more, about a year later. Her family had asked, through the proper channels, whether they might be allowed to thank in person the man who'd saved their daughter's life, and it was arranged, quietly, the way these things are. And so one afternoon I found myself in an ordinary room being introduced to an ordinary, healthy, slightly shy 7-year-old girl, with no idea, really, of what had happened to her. She'd been too young and too quickly fine to carry any memory of the worst of it. To her, I was just a tall man her mum and dad were being strange and emotional about. Her mother, though, her mother remembered everything. Her mother took both my hands and couldn't speak for a moment, and then said the thing that parents say, the thing there's no good answer to: "You gave me my whole life back. You understand? She is my whole life, and you gave her back to me." And I said the thing you say, which is that I was just glad I was there, just glad I could help, all the inadequate true things. And the little girl, bored of the adults being weird, tugged at her mum's sleeve and asked if they could go now. And we all laughed, the wet kind of laugh, because that's what you want, isn't it? That's the whole point. A 7-year-old healthy enough and ordinary enough to be bored. That's the entire victory, right there in a child wanting to go home. I've thought a lot about the fact that she doesn't remember it. At first it seemed sad that the most important thing I ever did, I did for someone who will never know it happened. But I've come around on that. Because that's actually the purest version of the job, isn't it? You protect people, and the best outcome, the very best one, is that they never even know they needed protecting. They just get to go on with their ordinary lives, bored and healthy and free, carrying no memory of the few seconds when everything hung in the balance. The good we do is supposed to be invisible. She doesn't remember nearly dying because I made sure it stayed a thing that nearly happened. That's not sad. That's the whole job done right. I left protection a couple of years after that. My time came the way it does. And I've had a lot of quiet hours since to think about that afternoon, and about the half-second between hearing and acting, and about what it means that I didn't wait for the word. Here's where I've landed. We build rules for very good reasons. The protocols, the chains of approval, the discipline of wait for the word, these aren't bureaucratic nonsense. They're the accumulated wisdom of people who learned, often tragically, what happens when everyone acts on their own instinct at once. I believe in the rules. I defend them to anyone. Most of the time, the officer who waits for the word is the wiser, better officer, and the one who freelances is a liability. But every now and then, rarely, but it happens, there comes a moment that the rules didn't foresee. A child on the floor, a clock running down, a few seconds that are the whole game. And in those moments, the thing that saves a life is not the protocol. It's a human being who has trained and drilled and disciplined themselves for years, and who, in the one instant it matters, lets something deeper than the training take the wheel. The rules get you ready. But there's a half-second sometimes where being ready isn't enough, and you have to actually move, before the word comes, on nothing but instinct and love, and the refusal to watch someone die while you wait for permission. The trick, and I don't think anyone ever fully masters it, is knowing which kind of moment you're in. Knowing when to be the disciplined officer who waits, and when to be the one who doesn't. I got it right that afternoon. I might not have. The line between the hero and the liability is thinner than anyone comfortable would like to admit, and I've never pretended otherwise. But her name came through the radio in a voice that had lost its flatness, and there was a child between us, and I moved. And a little girl I'll probably never see again gets to grow up bored and healthy and free, with no memory of the afternoon her life ran out, and two people, a guard and a princess, both refused to wait for approval to save it. I'd wait for the word 1,000 times. I'd break for it once. That afternoon was the once, and I'd do it again tomorrow.